Hello and welcome to episode 70 of Yoga Research and Beyond. We're talking about PROMs, reliability, and validity today. The kind of PROMs, probably not what you're thinking of unless you listen to the last episode. It's PROMs that stands for Patient-Reported Outcome Measures. And these are basically surveys that are given out to patients to help clinicians figure out plans for treatment. And the two we're talking about today, Pain Catastrophizing Scale, it's the PCS, and the TSK, the Tampa Scale for Kinesiophobia. I'm your co-host, Ariana founder of Yoga Research and Beyond, and strength trainer, yoga teacher in New York City, and co-founder of New York Strength.
Hi, I'm Jules Mitchell. I'm an educator for yoga teachers, mostly continuing ed, teacher training, all in biomechanics, anatomy, and research literacy. And before I turn it back over to Ariana and have her introduce the paper that we chose for today's short podcast, I just want to share a little story why I thought this topic would be really interesting. It came up on our last podcast, episode 69, because they looked at these PROMs. But one time in one of the group calls in my mentoring program, we were looking at a paper and they had their version of a PROM, and it was a body awareness questionnaire. And one of the women in the program was like, what is this silly questionnaire? Where did they come up with this? And why are they even using it to measure body awareness? And I realized that we don't really know a lot about science. We're not just a scientifically literate community. And I explained to her that they didn't just pull this questionnaire out of the sky. They didn't just write it and decide. That if she does a little research, she might find that the study itself or the questionnaire itself is heavily studied. And that is a branch of science that we call meta-science. So it's the science of science. And that's really what today's topic is and what today's paper is. It is about looking at the science behind choosing the surveys and are they reliable and valid? And I'll define those terms a little bit more later, but I'm going to turn it over to Ariana to talk about the paper itself.
Yeah, I like that this is a meta science, a meta paper for us. And I don't look at papers like this often. And it's a very dense paper. We're going to spare you from the density and some challenging statistical concepts in here. But I still gained so much from looking at this. And we'll go over how it could be useful for you too. But a little bit about the paper. The title of it is Development and Validation of Short Forms of the Pain Catastrophizing Scale and the Tampa Scale for Kinesiophobia in musculoskeletal chronic pain patients. It's from the Journal of Pain Research, from 2023. 7 authors. The lead author is Joan Le Carré, and the research was done in Switzerland. So pain is complicated. And as yoga teachers, fitness professionals, it's important to have that in the back pocket. And perhaps you've heard of the biopsychosocial model. And this paper, this survey, this process gets right into the heart of all that. Once we understand it's not just physical, it's also, there's a social component, a psychological component. Those things can give us language for how to talk to our clients and students, and gives us more compassion really for their pain experience. So if someone is avoiding exercise because they're afraid, that fear and that avoidance itself can exacerbate the pain and lead potentially to more disability. And these are important topics for clinicians, not just yoga teachers and fitness professionals. So the purpose of this paper was to shorten these long surveys. The PCS and the TSK are long surveys. The PCS is 13 questions originally, and the TSK is 17. And they shortened them at the end of this process. They shortened them to 5 questions and 6 questions in their questionnaires. And that makes them so much more usable, not just for the clinician, but for the patients. Because imagine you are a patient and you're in pain and you're pissed off and you get handed this elaborate questionnaire. It can be really intimidating to answer these complicated questions, and you might not get through it, and you might just not answer them properly. So having short versions of this is super, super useful. Also for the clinician, so that it's quicker to assess what's going on and develop a treatment for their problem. So they want to shorten these papers. A little bit about catastrophizing pain. Those questions relate to rumination, like how much they're thinking about the pain, how much they're magnifying it in their mind, how helpless they feel. The kinesiophobia is how much avoidance they have, how much they might be fearing the activity that they're about to do. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that they would want to do this. And as I said, it gives us language and perhaps more compassion, hopefully, in working with people in pain. So the method, how'd they do this? They wanted to not just shorten the surveys and be done. They wanted to make sure that they work. So it's an elaborate process. Mm-hmm. It's an elaborate process. I'm not going to go into everything, but it was a 6-year study from May of 2014 to August 2020. And for the first 3 years, they had about 1,800 patients, a little less than that, who participated in musculoskeletal rehab. 88% of them were male. We'll come back to that later. And then approximately 1,300 of those people participated in the process to shorten the survey. And then at the end of that, 60 to 65 people participated in assessing, like, does that short version work? Is it reliable, valid, which Jules will go into. So 65 people at the end, the 75% of those people were also male. And in that process, they relied on a lot of extensive statistical analysis to, like, I like to call them MacGyver tools to assess statistically how effective they are. But then also they had expertise along the way from a lot of professionals, which was apparently different for this kind of study. And in the end, they determined that this short version, great, it's valid, it's reliable, but still, if you want more extensive, in-depth understanding, to use the longer versions. That's the gist of it.
Awesome. I love that it was such a long study, very highly powered study. Well, let me talk a little bit about reliability and validity, since we've used those terms, and then we'll see. I have some other notes, and you probably do too, and we'll wrap it up from there. So reliability is how consistent the test is, or how consistent the survey is, versus validity is how accurate it is. So we're looking for consistency and accuracy. So before we get into the test, I'm going to share a fun out in the world example that I actually shared in my book about reliability. So when we're looking for consistency, we want to make sure that the same results can be produced under the same conditions. And you'll find that they actually did that in this paper. They tested them on day 1 and again on day 4. So can we get the same results? The example that I'm going to give about bartending is, I used to be a nightclub bartender and a nightclub bar manager. And on the first of the month, every month, we had to take inventory of the alcohol so that we could run our numbers, right? Finish our P&L, know how much profit and loss we had. So before opened on the first, or sometimes after work on the last day of the month, I would get with a person, a rater, R-A-T-E-R, someone who's rating, and one of us would write down the result and the other one would pick up each bottle and measure it. So we would pick up a bottle, and we did it by tenths. So you'd pick up a bottle of vodka and you'd say, there's 0.2 units of vodka in this bottle. And then you'd pick up the next bottle, it'd be a bottle of gin, there's 0.4, and so one person would read it and the other person would write it down. And then and this was, before internet and before smartphones. And so we did all this manually on a clipboard and then had to enter. It's a different world now. Now you would just scan it with your phone camera and it would tell you, but back in the day. Anyway, so to know if that was a reliable measurement, I would have to pick up the bottle of vodka and say, that's 0.2, and then go do something else and come back and pick up the same bottle, not knowing it's the same bottle. And would I say 0.2 again? If I said 0.3, then that's a very unreliable way of measuring with my eye. That's like an example. So that would be just the intra-rater reliability. Can I repeat it? So that's when we're giving the survey to people. Can they get the same results if they take it again? Then there's also a concept of inter-rater reliability, which means can it be consistent across multiple people? So at the bar, we never switched roles, right? The person who was the measurer with the eye always was the measurer with the eye. And the person who was logging on the clipboard was always logging on the clipboard, because if I had my buddy pick up the bottle, my 0.2 might be his 0.3. That's not very good rater reliability, right? Inter-rater reliability. And so it was the same person every time. Like I didn't pick a new friend each month because we had to be consistent between last month and this month. Otherwise our numbers would be off. So that's a really fun out in the world example of why reliability is important. So in this paper, it's not possible to really measure inter-reliability because everybody's subjective experience of pain is different. So there's really no way of measuring that. So what they really focused on in this paper is making sure that if they did a test and a retest, that they, without big change in conditions, just a couple days apart, were they similar enough? And that's when all the statistical stuff comes in that we're going to spare you from. Okay, validity. Validity is the accuracy, right? So back to the bar example, is me looking at a bottle and choosing 0.2, is that actually a valid way of measuring? Is it really 0.2? And the thing is, we could have tested that by then pouring it into a measuring cup and actually known. But it was just the standard that we did. And so I'm going to say it's probably not very valid. That would be my guess. But again, if you're working a bar a long time, you do kind of know. So I guess the more experienced you are, the more valid it would be. But that would be the accuracy of it. And so for this example in the paper, the validity would be, the question of the validity would be, do the questions in the questionnaire accurately measure catastrophizing and kinesiophobia? And again, that's very difficult because it's such a subjective test. It's not something that we can validate with objective measures like a measuring cup. And so in this paper, one of the strategies that they really used was they relied on expert opinion. Right. So they relied obviously they had the initial questionnaires, the long forms that they were trying to reduce. So the questions came from there. So they had that and they had those validity measures. But then they actually used experts to help them reduce it. I'm just going to read one sentence and then I'll see what else Ariana wants to add. But 7 experts, rheumatologist, physiatrist, psychologist, occupational therapist, physiotherapist, and a socio-professional worker participated. And so they had, experience, each had more than 5 years experience in rehab. And so we were sort of relying on their expertise to provide the validity that these questions actually address catastrophizing and kinesiophobia. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
I appreciated that they had all those experts involved, and they say you'll know more if this is true or how accurate it is, but it's unusual to have expert analysis like that it's mostly statistical analysis that they get the results from, but they were all from the same institution.
Mm-hmm. Like that was one of the limitations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that could be an issue, but I like that they were diverse in their fields.
But coming from the same institution, they could have the same bias because of administrative procedures or, technical processes within the facility that might lean them a certain direction. But it's fine. It's just, this is what research does. We disclose these things. It's not necessarily better, I guess, if we had these experts from various facilities. That might have been a limitation as well.
Yeah.
So it's just worth mentioning.
Yeah. Yeah. And while we're talking about limitations, I mentioned before the percentage of men who were involved in the study. So like that limits how it could be applicable to women, or
Yes.
so it might not be as reliable for them. And I was thinking about that a lot actually, because I have several female clients with chronic pain issues, and it's a different, I don't know, it's just different. I know women typically have higher pain thresholds, but there's also, I don't know, higher sensitivity in some of the people I'm working with. So
Have you seen that New York
that.
Times? Have you seen the New York Times article from last week that was talking about the man flu? Did you see that? No. So anyway, it was basically saying, does the man flu really exist? Because the kind of trope that a sick man is such a big baby and a sick woman just gets up and handles life. Anyway, and it was kind of validating that the man flu might exist. They truly are bigger babies when it comes to being sick and not feeling well. And the comments were hilarious because it was like people were like, now you're just giving men the excuse, But then women were like, but then it's actually, some people were like, this is even more of a reason why women need to be studied when it comes to pain and illness, because our biology is different. So it was an interesting, I'll put a link on the post on the show notes to it. Yeah.
But this is a problem with so much research,
Yes.
that it is mostly with men. So it's not just this paper. Yeah.
And also, just while we're on limitations, before you move on, I think it's also not just that it was men, but it was men with musculoskeletal pain from other terminal illnesses, other conditions, organ issues might not apply here. So that was another limitation, is its musculoskeletal pain.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the statistical analysis stuff really made my head spin. But when I would just kind of focus on the big picture of this study, I found it very, very enlightening. And I was curious about the actual questions in the surveys themselves that they came up with.
I have them.
Yeah.
I have them.
Cool. Yeah.
So they were in a supplement. I figured we'll just end with this, since that was kind of where you're at. And I don't have much more to say. We wanted to do a little lesson on what reliability and validity is. So first, let me just mention that because it was in Switzerland, it was in French-speaking Switzerland. And so this was French-speaking subjects. And then in the supplements, under the discussion, there's a link, because we'll link to the paper. So under the discussion, there's a link to supplements, and that's where you can find the questions. And the first document is in French, but the next document has all the translations and all the various languages. It look like Italian and Spanish, but I can't read those. So I'll read the English ones because it's very short. But I think it's insightful. And this is, again, why we're doing these podcasts. We don't want you to take this paper, read through the statistics, and be super critical on whether or not these are valid or reliable. This is for your general education. It's really good to know what types of questions are being asked of subjects in musculoskeletal pain research settings. Like Ariana said, it makes you more compassionate dealing with your students, your clients, your loved ones, and even yourself if you have musculoskeletal pain. So let's look at the pain catastrophizing first. You rate them. The questions are the answers that you can choose from are not at all, to a slight degree, to a moderate degree, to a great degree, or all the time. So it's like a 5-point scale. Nothing to constant. So for catastrophizing, again, as Ariana said, that's the rumination side of things. When I'm in pain, it's terrible and I think it's never going to get better. When I'm in pain, I'm become afraid that the pain will get worse. When I'm in pain, I can't seem to keep it out of my mind. When I'm in pain, there's nothing I can do to reduce the intensity of the pain. And when I'm in pain, I wonder whether something serious may happen. Those are the questions. That's pretty easy to fill out.
Yeah. And that doesn't even mean we should be giving surveys to our clients. It's just just it gives us, as I said, language, and how we just have a conversation with people about what's going on.
And how to listen. You don't have to give someone this survey, if they're talking to you and they're expressing to you that they don't think it's going to get any better, that's telling you that they're catastrophizing, So it teaches you how to listen and also not how to react. Like you said, like be more compassionate. I always joke around when I tell people I have a rotator cuff tear that I found on accident for a random MRI for something else, that people tend to go like, like they're all worried for me. And I'm like, what? I don't even have any shoulder pain. I do handstands. I do overhead presses. I have zero limitations. Why are you worried about me? They're catastrophizing for me. So we want to make sure we're not catastrophizing to students or loved ones who are already catastrophizing. We want to absorb some of that for them.
Yeah.
Okay, for the Kinesiophobia scale, it is a 1 to 4 answer option. 1, strongly agree. 2, disagree. 3, agree. And 4, strongly agree. And so again, this was about moving, kinesiophobia, fear of moving, not catastrophizing, not rumination. And number 1, I'm afraid that I might injure myself if I exercise. My body is telling me I have something dangerously wrong. Pain always means I've injured my body. Simply being careful that I do not make any unnecessary movements is the safest thing I can do to prevent my pain from worsening. I can't do all the things normal people do because it's too easy for me to get injured. Even though something is causing me a lot of pain, I don't think it's actually dangerous. So that's an interesting one because they mentioned that in the paper. Yeah. They did a few of the reverse to trip the person up so that, because that one is the opposite, right? Even though it's causing pain, I don't think it's dangerous. That should be the opposite of the other questions, right? And so they did that in order to make sure that people weren't just like checking the boxes and, being done. So they did discuss that as well. Kind of cool.
And it also opens the door to the conversation of, that pain is not necessarily direct damage that is, happening to you. Mm-hmm. So that's a good question. I like that they included that one.
It gets people to think from the other direction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's really all I got. We just wanted to share with you a little bit about meta-science and how much work goes into these surveys, that it's not just haphazard, that there are people that are really dedicating their lives to perfecting these and researching these. And so it's always fun to dig a little deeper and learn from them.
Yeah. I did. Thanks, Jules.
Yeah. See you next time.